How many of you are fans of the TV show The Office? Let me see a show of hands, okay? It was kind of light at the 8 a.m., but better here at the 10. Well, if you're a fan of the show, you might remember an episode where Dwight Schrute convinces everyone to celebrate the annual Christmas party in Pennsylvania Dutch style. And of course, because Dwight is the zany office nerd, his Christmas is nothing like you'd expect. Instead of the warm, festive joy of eggnog, he serves glühwein, a barely drinkable mulled wine that he claims is also used to sterilize medical instruments. Instead of Christmas turkey, he presents them with hog maw, or stuffed pig stomach, a traditional Pennsylvania Dutch dish that looks, well, a little less than appetizing. And instead of a festive kiss under the mistletoe, he introduces the completely fictional tradition of breaking the pig's rib after the meal. And finally, there's Dwight himself, not dressed as Jolly St. Nick, but as Belschnickel, the cranky Germanic version of Santa Claus who looks like a dirty wild man dressed in animal skins with a scraggly beard, carrying a bundle of switches in one hand and a leather sack in the other, ready to determine who has been naughty or nice. And nice co-workers receive a bizarre gift out of his leather sack, like a canning jar or a mouse trap. And naughty co-workers are lashed on the hand with his bundle of switches. It's a bizarre but hilarious scene where Christmas feels a lot more like Halloween than Christmas. And when Meredith complains in frustration, "Where is the eggnog and the sugar cookies?" Dwight says with righteous indignation, "This is austere, Meredith. This is celebrating Christmas for all of the right reasons. Cookies and toys and treats are mere distractions." So hold on to that image. Christmas really turned into Halloween, that bizarre contrast between joy and rules. Because that's exactly what's happening every time Jesus and the religious rulers clash over the Sabbath. The Sabbath, this beautiful, life-giving gift from God, had been turned into a joyless burden. And in our gospel lesson this morning, Jesus once again puts his finger directly on the heart of the issue by healing someone on the Sabbath. Jesus calls to a woman who's been bent over and unable to stand up straight, bound for 18 years. And when Jesus sees her, he says, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." And when he lays his hands on her, she stands up straight and begins praising God. And once again, the religious leaders are furious with him for doing it. The synagogue ruler challenges Jesus by proclaiming to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day." Thank you, Belschnickel. So what's happening? What we see here are 2 very different ways of understanding the Sabbath. The synagogue ruler sees the Sabbath as a test of holiness. God set apart the seventh day as holy and commanded his people to refrain from all worldly labor on the seventh day. So just to make sure that there's no chance of offending God, the religious leaders made up all kinds of rules that carefully define what qualifies as labor on the Sabbath. They regulated how far you could walk. A Sabbath day's journey of no more than 2,000 cubits, or about a half a mile. They defined what was considered to be a burden to carry. Anything heavier than a dried fig was forbidden. And they even created rules about healing, allowing it only if a person's life was in immediate danger. Why so rigid? Because the Old Testament prophets had said that violating the Sabbath was one of the reasons that they were sent into exile. So the Pharisees' solution was, if you don't want to go into exile again, then you'd better follow the rules. Our rules. You get the picture? God's holiness is fragile, and so is his temper. Defile the Sabbath and expect punishment. It's a fearful mindset, more like Halloween than Christmas. Well, that is not Jesus' mindset. Jesus' starting point isn't avoiding punishment, but celebrating God's victory over evil. The celebration of the very first Sabbath was God's victory over darkness and chaos. Remember how Genesis begins? God's Spirit hovers over the swirling chaos of the unformed universe and speaks. And the minute God speaks, chaos submits, chaos obeys, light breaks forth, and darkness recedes. The land emerges and the waters pull back. God creates a beautiful domain where life can flourish. It's God creating life and light where there was only darkness and death before. So when God had finished that labor to celebrate and honor his victory, he invited us to rest in it. That's what Sabbath calls us to remember and celebrate. But throughout the Old Testament, God's victory over darkness and death continues to expand. The Sabbath wasn't just about the seventh day, it was about the seventh year. Every seventh year was a Sabbath year. On the Sabbath year, Israel was not to plant or harvest any crops. The fields were to lie fallow and rest. The land rests. The animals rest. You rest. Take the whole year off. Can you imagine? God's got this. Every 50th year was a year of Jubilee. That's the year after 7 sevens of years. And the year of Jubilee, not only did the land rest, but all ancestral land that had been sold in the last 50 years reverted to the original owners. And every Israelite that had become an indentured servant of any kind was set free. You see, it's a total reset of the entire system. No matter how hard the times had become, even if you had to sell the family farm and lost everything, including your own freedom, you got it back. So can you see, Sabbath isn't just about rest, it's about restoration. Keeping Sabbath isn't just celebrating the fact that God is in control and taking care of us. It's an invitation to participate in God's justice. in God setting things right, to participate in the way God is healing the world. So you can see then why Jesus gets angry when he's challenged for healing on the Sabbath. Jesus is keeping the spirit of the Sabbath perfectly. In our gospel, he's literally setting someone free. He's restoring and healing this woman to the way God created her. And that's why Jesus calls these religious leaders hypocrites. They claim to be honoring the Sabbath and safeguarding God's fragile holiness, but they're really doing the exact opposite. They are defiling God's holiness and God's purposes because they are heaping burdens on people's shoulders and depriving them of the goodness of God that the Sabbath is meant to celebrate. So the reason Jesus continues to heal on the Sabbath and even encourage these clashes with the Pharisees is because he wants the fight. Not only our understanding of the Sabbath, but our understanding of God and salvation itself is at stake. What kind of God are we worshiping anyhow? Is he the God of fragile holiness like the Pharisees want us to believe? Someone to fear and dread more than we love? A God more like the God of Halloween than the God of Christmas? Or is God the one who created everything good? The God who brings light out of darkness and life out of death? A God who wants us to flourish and thrive as his children? The God who came to be with us on Christmas and not haunt us on Halloween? So you see, this Sabbath debate really matters. The question is, which God do you serve? If you worship the God of the Pharisees, a God of fragile holiness, a God who's always just a little bit peeved, a little bit cranky, a God who gives you a mouse trap for a gift, and is ready to lash your hand like a switch, with a switch like an angry Belschnickel, then you can't rest. You can't rest because that God isn't at rest himself. He's perpetually on edge, worried that you're going to break a rule and defile him and make him dirty. God's heart isn't settled, so he couldn't possibly settle your heart. So you're constantly walking on eggshells and hustling to save yourself and perpetually controlled by anxiety. And it's important to realize that that kind of anxiety is contagious. Because as you're hustling and trying to make your life work and avoid God's punishment, you'll require that same effort of others. God isn't gracious with you, so you're not gracious with others. God never lets up on you, so you never let up on anyone else. If God is anxious and controlling and cranky, then of course you become an anxious, controlling, cranky Belschnickel yourself. You might talk like it's Christmas, talk about Jesus, but you'll be living like it's Halloween, living life like it's a nightmare. But God is not like that. God has done everything necessary to rescue you and the world. He's proven through Jesus that nothing can separate you from his love. All has been accomplished through Jesus. Jesus has mastered all of life, mastered sin, conquered death, and is making all things new and will make all things new. And all of those benefits are yours to enjoy by grace when you place your trust in him. So enter into that rest. And yes, come here on our Christian Sabbath and let your hearts rest in God's love, in the Word, in song, and in the sacrament. But this is not where the rest ends. It's where it begins. We're invited to enter into this rest every day, to live a life of peace and freedom. We can observe what I call micro Sabbaths throughout our day. Tiny moments of rest that remind us of God's unshakable love. So, at the traffic light, take a deep breath in, and as you breathe out, remember how God breathed life into creation. Remember that he loves you and is with you. And before you say the thing that you can't take back, pause and take another breath. And remember that God's words bring light and life. Before you spend one more minute worrying about things that you can't control anyway, rest in God's perfect, loving control of your life. And when you do, you'll no longer live as if Christmas were Halloween. One day at a time and one breath at a time, progressively, one day at a time, you'll move from a life of anxiety to a life of increasing confidence and rest. From Halloween to Christmas, from Belschnickel to Jesus, from being bound and enslaved to being set free. Amen.